Now let's go back to our big story of the hour with the release of the quarterly crime stats for the first quarter of the year. Nearly 5,000 people were murdered during that period, January to March 2021. That's, of course, according to the Police Minister, CELE. He releasing those figures a short while ago. This figure is higher than the same period last year. Now, Guy Lamb is a criminologist at the University of Stellenbosch's Political Science Department, joining us now just for him to give us a more sense about these numbers. Dr. Lamb, good afternoon, and thank you very much for your time. Can I begin literally where the minister began when he delivered his stats? He took South Africa through the numbers of policemen and women who've died, who've been killed in the line of duty. How important do you think that message is?
Apologies, I was muted there. The message he's trying to convey with that sort of statement is that policemen and women are putting their lives along the line. They live in very dangerous circumstances. They work in very dangerous circumstances, and they probably have some of the most dangerous jobs within South Africa. So that's the point he's trying to make. So it is very worrying that policemen and women do get killed on a fairly regular basis within South Africa.
Yeah, he said 24 members of the service were killed in the first 3 months of this year, 11 while on duty. And then he was thanking the men and women in blue for the work that they are doing, and that progress made in some of the crime fighting is due to them. If you look at the overall picture, is there progress made in crime fighting?
Well, it's always difficult because, I mean, the police play a role in fighting crime, and some of their actions result in a reduction in certain types of crime, particularly violent crime. We know that certain focused police operations can bring down particularly murder numbers, can bring down attempted murder numbers, can bring down, violent types of robberies as well. What we're seeing in the sort of crime stats that have come out recently is that crime generally has come down, violent crime, with the exception of murder and attempted murder. But, of course, the national figures are a bit misleading because they don't tell you why is this the case. I mean, it's interesting, in many police station areas, crime, particularly violent crime such as murder and attempted murder, has come down, but in other areas it's gone up. And through the sort of detailed presentation that we were taken through, it really sort of pointed to some very worrying trends, particularly in KZN. We're seeing in a number of stations there, particularly Plessis Laya, Nyanda, Inanda, and Umlazi, where we're seeing major increases in murder happening there, sort of almost sometimes more than 100% over the quarter compared to the quarter of the previous period. So there are some worrying things happening in KZN, also in the Eastern Cape as well. Interestingly, in Western Cape, it seems to have stabilized a bit. I mean, the murder levels are still quite high, but certainly didn't increase as much as KZN and Eastern Cape. So maybe the kind of policing operations that have been focused in the Western Cape have been bearing fruit.
Yeah, and then when it comes to sexual offences, while there's a decline, rape has gone up in this period by 4%, and most of that taking place in the homes of the victims or the alleged perpetrator.
Yeah, those, of course, South Africa remains and continues to have very high levels of sexual violence, very high levels of domestic violence. It typically takes place in private spaces within homes, either of the victim or the perpetrator. So there's really no surprise there.
Yeah, I mean, he pointed out the LUSIKISIKI police station in the Eastern Cape having overtaken Inanda police station in Durban in terms of the rape stats and stuff. As you said, there's some localized nuances to these stats.
Yes, and I mean, unfortunately, we aren't given access to that sort of information. That's within the police dockets, but it's certainly something that, given the dramatic increase in LUSIKISIKI, that it's clearly a task team needs to be deployed to that particular area, needs to look at what are the circumstances that are leading to this and what sort of interventions are required beyond just police interventions, because this type of violence is not a policing approach can't just solve it. There are other sorts of interventions that are required.
Yeah, you also touched on that DNA backlog that comes up now and again, especially in the investigation of sexual offences and crimes like that. But we know the role of DNA in terms of forensics investigation in other crimes, how important that is.
Absolutely. I mean, if you need the sort of this criminal justice system within South Africa and also the policing approach within South Africa is based on a sort of an assumption that you really need to demonstrate that there will be consequences if you commit a crime, that you will get a conviction, you will go to jail, you will have a criminal record. But there needs to be trials for that to happen. And, you know, kind of you can't secure convictions against perpetrators unless you have the necessary kind of credible evidence. And a lot of that evidence is DNA. So if it's been stuck within labs, stuck within that particular process, the justice system gets delayed and justice for victims gets delayed quite significantly.
Dr. Guy Lamb, thank you very much for your time and insights. Initial thoughts of the crime stats for the first quarter of the year, January to March, that were just released over an hour ago by the police minister. Still